here to do the devil's work.
It is October 1st and spooky season has begun. The leaves are changing colors. It's getting darker outside. I feel like I'm being stalked by a weird guy in a white mask that keeps staring at me out the window. I don't really know what's going on. I might get possessed by the devil. Who knows? October's a strange and random month where anything can happen. And so I want to give you guys a bunch of horror and spooky content on the channel. Not that I don't do that regularly anyways, but at least now it makes a little bit more sense. And I wanted to start out by giving you guys some top 10s, and I thought a fun idea to do would be my top 10 favorite horror films of each in particular decade. Now, I would love to go as far back as like the 1930s, you know, but I just don't feel like I'm going to have enough time to do every single decade on the channel. So I'm going to start with the 1970s. Most particularly because I feel like the 70s are going to have more widely known movies for us to talk about and discuss in the comments, but also the 70s was such a massive tonal shift in terms of the horror genre. Movies got a lot darker, a lot more gritty, a lot more explicit, more blood, more violence, but also I feel like this was really the era where horror took on like an entire new identity. We had like the classics from back in the day and like all the monster movies and stuff from like the 50s and 60s, but the 70s got dark and really fucked up and more psychological. And I really do think you could potentially make an argument to say that the 70s was the best decade of horror. So this is just going to be my personal ranking. This is not a ranking of what I think are the objective best. These are going by my personal favorites. So obviously it's an extremely subjective list, and your list is going to look very different than mine. I do have a couple of honorable mentions before I get into the main top 10. One of them is going to be called Alice, Sweet Alice, which a lot of people attribute to being one of the early slasher films. I think this movie is incredibly creepy. There's a lot of religious themes going on. It's got a masked killer, but it's a little bit of a slow burn. Like it kind of drags a bit, you know, especially through the middle portion of the movie, but all of the kill scenes are filmed in this classic sort of gritty 70s style that just makes it feel very realistic and just dirty and uncomfortable. And the killer just has this basic outfit. It's just this yellow raincoat with this regular kind of face mask, but there's something about it that I think the simplicity of it is very, very disturbing. Didn't quite hit the top 10, but I want to give you guys a couple of maybe more obscure ones just because I feel like especially the top half of my top 10 list is going to be pretty basic. It's going to be all the movies you expect just in my personal order. My other honorable mention is Suspiria. Now, I got to be honest with you guys. I have only seen Suspiria once, and it was many years ago at this point, so I am probably due for a rewatch. What I felt about the movie when I first watched it is that I enjoyed it for its visuals and its kill scenes, but I wasn't really into the story or the characters of the movie that much. It was one of those moments where I felt like I was missing something because Suspiria is one of those movies that's hyped up so much by horror fans and the horror community, and then when I finally got around to watch it, I was super excited and probably let all that build up in my mind, and I watched it, and like I said, I enjoyed the visuals, but I just wasn't too deeply into the movie. But I still think it's worth watching even just for the visuals alone. But to be fair, once again, I've only seen it once, so I should probably go back and rewatch it. There's also going to be a glaring omission from this list and perhaps a little bit of a controversial pick. I didn't put Jaws on this list, and it's kind of arguable whether or not Jaws is a horror movie. And I've always kind of debated this in my mind, but I'll tell you straight up that I think Jaws is one of the best movies ever made. It was about a year or a year and a half ago, I made what I thought would be objectively the top 10 best movies ever made. Like if I took my personal preferences out of it and I'm not making a favorite list, if I had to come up with a top 10 of what I think the top 10 best movies ever made, flawless movies, absolutely 10 out of 10, no negatives whatsoever, everything is, you know, perfected to the highest degree, from the screenplay to the acting performances to the way that it's shot, from the intensity. Jaws was on that list. I legitimately do think that Jaws is one of the best movies ever made. I just personally never really look at it as a horror movie. It definitely has horrific sequences, like the opening scene is very scary, and obviously there's just the fear of there being a giant creature in the ocean that will eat you. Obviously, like, it deals on the concept of fear and people being afraid to go into the ocean and afraid to go swimming and all of that. So I guess I just personally never really look at it as a horror movie, despite it having some horrific sequences. I think that beyond the first scene and then the scene a little bit later where the little boy gets killed in the ocean, I think it really turns into a little bit more of a drama and a suspense movie that just that isn't like particularly scary, but it's more like exciting or engaging, and definitely deals with, you know, the headspace of where its three main characters are at and their sort of camaraderie together, and how all of their personalities are so vastly different but kind of bounce off one another. And to me, yeah, I don't know, I just don't think of it as a horror movie, but I know that's going to be controversial because a lot of people do. So all things being equal, if you consider Jaws to be a horror movie, then revamp my list and put it at number 3. But as of right now, since I think of it more of a drama than I do as a horror movie, I'm just going to put it in honorable mention. So at my number 10 spot, I'm going to put Carrie, which is the movie adaptation of the very first Stephen King novel, which is just kind of crazy to think about that he's been writing novels for 50 years and still going. But Carrie was the first, and the movie adaptation is worthy of all the praise that it gets. I think it's a really difficult movie to watch at times because beyond the supernatural stuff that mostly happens towards the end, the majority of the movie is just this girl, Carrie, just taking so much abuse from so many different avenues of her life. If it's not her overbearing, hyper-religious mother that's locking her in a closet, if it's not all the kids at school bullying her and throwing tampons at her in the shower, if it's not tending to take her out on they're going to take her to prom and then, pulling this prank on her and all of these horrible things that happen to her. And, I had a rough time growing up, but I didn't have it like Carrie did. And there's this interesting thing that happens to the audience at the end of the movie that I really love, is because Carrie is our main character and we go through this journey with her, by the time she enacts her vengeance at the end of the film, you're kind of in this weird place because on the one hand, you want to see her get some kind of revenge, right? But on the other hand, she's causing so much chaos and death and devastation that you're just like, dear God, there's like, we don't need to go this far. But at the same time, can you really blame her after everything that's happened? So it puts the audience in a very strange kind of position to decide, like, do I want this to happen? Do I not want this to happen? And it is one of the most iconic scenes ever with the prom dress covered in blood, everybody getting massacred. Just a great adaptation all around. While coming up with this list, I was trying to think of a couple more unconventional movies because my top 5 is going to be so basic, like it's not even funny. So for number 9, I'm going to choose The Abominable Mr. Phibes, which is a movie starring Vincent Price, where his wife dies. He's in a car accident, completely mangling his face, and he blames the negligence of the surgeons working on his wife for her death and vows vengeance. He decides that he's going to get vengeance on them using basically like the plagues of Egypt, or like the biblical plagues, as his jumping off point to get vengeance on them. He goes way over the top with his plans of vengeance and murder. And Vincent Price is totally creepy in this role. He does such a great job. I mean, Vincent Price always does a great job, but here he can't speak normally. Like, his face is all, distorted. He can't speak normally. It's like out of a thing out of his neck or something like that. He has all these sort of weird animatronic things playing music and organs and stuff. And he devises these like tasks for these people to do. Like there's one where the doctor has to get a key out of somebody's chest, and he only has a certain amount of time to do it. I think it's the length of time that his wife was in surgery or something. And so like he has to do it within this certain amount of time. And it's one of those films that, like, I feel like it doesn't get discussed a lot. I think it's kind of disappeared over time. And I actually thought it was a 60s movie because I don't know, there's something about the look of it. It looks very 1960s, but it's a 70s movie. So I wanted to throw a few more, I guess, obscure movies on the list that I enjoy. So I would say, yeah, The Abominable Dr. Phibes. Definitely check it out. At number 8, I'm going to put the original The Omen. I'm not a big fan of The Omen as a franchise, to be honest. I haven't really seen a lot of the sequels, but the first one I have seen, and yeah, it definitely does earn its spot in the history of horror movies for sure. It's a little bit of a slow burn, as I feel like a lot of these 70s movies are. They're a little bit slower than maybe movies that would come out today, for better or for worse, depending on how you want to look at it. But when The Omen has the moments that do hit, they hit hard. You never forget the girl hanging herself from the building. You never forget the guy whose head gets chopped off by the glass. It's not like kill after kill after kill. There's not like a ton of gore and violence or anything, but I think that's what makes the kill scenes work is that, they really stand out. And it feels, there's a lot of like religious kind of horror movies that came out in the 70s with this and a few others on this list. But this is the one that I feel has the most ominous feeling when it comes to the idea of religions or the devil or kind of the haunting atmosphere that whole, church, communion setting can bring in. There's something very odd and uncomfortable about it, and The Omen makes it feel as uncomfortable as it possibly can. So I think this movie is more all about atmosphere. It's all about tone. It's all about the mood that it puts you in. And in that, it succeeds phenomenally. So yeah, check out The Omen if you haven't. Number 7 pick is going to be the original Black Christmas, which a lot of people attribute to being the very first slasher film. Depends on where you want to kind of quantify what a slasher film is. Because in some ways, I would agree with you, but it came out the same year as Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which will be on this list a little bit later. It doesn't fall necessarily into like the traditions and tropes of what you would think a slasher movie would be. But it definitely does have a kill count and memorable kills, and also a killer talking to its victims over the phone, which I always kind of forget about. And then every time I am reminded of Black Christmas, I'm like, oh yeah, that's probably where like Scream, originally got its idea from. Yeah, Black Christmas, it is another kind of like slow burning one, slow building one, but I enjoy it for what it is and for its atmosphere and just sort of the weird kind of sadistic phone call scenes that like make you feel incredibly uncomfortable. But hey, if a movie can make me feel uncomfortable and get me set into that mood of making something like Christmas, which is, usually considered to be joyous and, fulfilling and fun and family and everything, and warp that into being something disturbing, then it definitely deserves a little bit of recognition. My number 6 pick is going to be The Last House on the Left from Wes Craven. A couple Wes Craven films I could have picked here. I would also say Hills Have Eyes, also a honorable mention for sure. But Last House on the Left was the very first film directed by Wes Craven, and it is the behind the scenes of how this movie came to be is so fascinating to me, because essentially Wes Craven was working with Sean Cunningham and editing porn at the time, and they got a budget to do a horror movie, and they were like, hey, if you can come up with a horror movie idea, write a script, you can direct it. And Wes Craven had a like deeply religious background growing up, and he never really was a big fan of horror movies or never really watched them because he wasn't allowed to. And so I just think it's so funny that the idea for a horror movie coming from a guy that has no background with horror films whatsoever, he comes up with this sick, demented, twisted idea of this gang of like murderous, rapist people that abduct these two girls, have their way with them, murder them in the woods, and then somehow end up at those girls' parents' house. The parents find out and they enact vengeance against the killers in just as, kind of the same kind of sadistic ways. A dude gets his penis bitten off. There's a chainsaw. People blow their brains out. Like, this movie is insane. Like, It's not just like, hey, come up with a horror movie. Oh, what can I think of? I'll make a spooky ghost. It's just like, no, I'm going to make the most sick, disgusting, barbaric human beings you have ever seen in your goddamn life. I'm going to have them do something horrible, and then I'm going to have the tables turn and have horrible shit done to them. All filmed in this hyper low budget, gritty, almost documentary style look to the film, which again is something I love about the 1970s. So many of these films have that sort of very grainy, early film look that just it just captures something that I just don't feel like we get a lot of these days, where everything is filmed digitally and everything looks so crisp and clean. There's something about the dirt and the grime and the disgustingness of the 1970s that I just really enjoy. And like, I know this movie is not like a fun one to just throw on in the background or something. Like, it's definitely a draining movie because of its subject matter. But I do think that it is maybe better than it gets credit for sometimes, and take that with a grain of salt because I am a huge Wes Craven fan just in general. But I do think that this movie does have something special to it that I can't quite put my finger on, but it really does feel horrific. And I guess if you're counting down, best horror films, well, it's a movie that displays horror in its purest form, and I think that this is definitely one of those movies. Its only drawback really is the kind of dumb comedy segments that have no place in this film whatsoever. But other than that, I really enjoy it. So I don't know what that says about me. All right, from here on out, the top 5 are going to be incredibly basic, and they're going to be the same top 5 70s horror movies that are on everybody's list. So here's just my personal ranking of them. At number 5, I'm going to put Dawn of the Dead from George A. Romero. I actually just rewatched this film because I'm working on a big Living Dead retrospective video, and yeah, I do think it's one of the best. Unfortunately, you can't really watch this movie right now because it's not available on any streaming service, and it's out of print in the physical media form. So, you can only find it by scouring the interwebs, or if you already have a copy. There are some uploaded versions on YouTube, so there's that too, but really sad that this movie is not as accessible as it should be, because it really is one of the greatest zombie films of all time. Although I do slightly prefer Night of the Living Dead a little bit more, this one is right up there alongside it. I think it's just as good, and I can definitely see why people think it's better. It definitely went harder into the concept, more guts, more gore, has a great main cast of characters, has tons of memorable sequences of action and also comedy of the characters just kind of hanging out in a mall and having an entire mall to themselves. The special effects work by Tom Savini is one of the best of the decade. And with a lot of these horror movies, there isn't a ton of gore in a lot of them. But Dawn of the Dead was like, nah, fuck that. We're going to have gore throughout the entire thing. And it's also like this very hyper stylized, like very, very red blood. But for some reason, it just, I love that they did that because it just stands out in my mind every time that I think about it, that kind of separates it from every other zombie film. There's something about the almost bluish skin of the zombies in this movie and the way that the blood is bright red that you just don't really see in other things like it. So, number 5, Dawn of the Dead. Number 4 is going to be The Exorcist. Maybe shocked that this isn't at number 1, but I still think top 4 is pretty damn good. The Exorcist has been hailed as the scariest movie ever made, and it definitely is terrifying. The thing that I love about The Exorcist is that there's no levity in this entire movie. Even though there are some uplifting themes that come through at the end, the entire atmosphere and tone of this movie all the way through is just dark. It's just depressing. It doesn't give you any time to breathe. It doesn't give you any jokes. It doesn't give you any levity. It's just this super depressing story about this little girl that gets possessed by a demon, that calls itself the devil, but it's known as Pazuzu in the lore. But regardless, doesn't matter what it is. It's a demonic force that is, taking like the innocence of this girl. It is ruining her mother's life, trying to figure out what's going on with her and getting her all these tests and stuff like that. Eventually resorting to, the church and the exorcism because there's just nothing else to do. And then that final exorcism scene, the last 20 minutes of the movie is like the most like incredible thing, ever. The most incredible sequence in a horror movie ever. Like it's so damn good. It's so memorable. There's so many different moving pieces, the practical effects that are on display. It just is one of those movies that, you just stands the test of time and that you never forget about after watching it. Speaking of never being able to forget it, my number 3 choice is going to be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original. I feel like I'm reiterating the same points, but this one is also true. The thing that I love about this movie is just how dark and gritty it looks. It looks like documentary footage. I love that the score to this movie is not music, but it's just these kind of like tones, like these like strings that are being scraped on, or this like sound that you would hear in a slaughterhouse. And it gives a completely different style to this movie that I don't think any other movie has really been able to recapture ever. It's the terrifying concept of what could happen as you're dealing with other things on this list, like demonic forces and stuff. But this movie is just about cannibals, people that abduct you and torture you and cut you up with a chainsaw and eat you and stick you on hooks. And it's just a terrifying thing, especially if you were thinking like you were in the middle of nowhere, you're in rural Texas, and there's no one to hear you scream. This is the 70s, way before cell phones. It's like, what are you going to do? It introduces iconic characters like Leatherface, the cook and the hitchhiker, all those characters. But the thing that pulls it all together is that dinner scene at the end of the film that is one of the most haunting things I've ever seen. I remember when I watched this movie for the first time, I might have been like 12 or 13 years old. This is the only time I remember doing this, but I actually had to, I think it was on VHS, I had to pause the tape to like take a breather during that scene because it was just too intense for my child mind to endure at the time. And it had nothing to do with the violence, it had nothing to do with the gore. And there isn't really any gore in this movie, not really. It has to do with the psychological torment of the character. It was more about just imagining myself in that scenario and what you would do. And really, you can't do anything. And that's the scariest thing about it. My number 2 pick for my favorite 1970s horror movies is going to be Ridley Scott's Alien. What can I say about this franchise that I haven't already? I've talked about it so many times on the channel, but there is just no end to the amount of brilliance that's within this film. Just from the look of it, the style, how the spaceship interiors give you this claustrophobic feeling, but also just the fear of the unknown, or the fear of, I guess you would say, cosmic horror, that there's always something out there that you don't understand. And I think that the name Alien has several meanings in the film. Like, obviously it is an alien species, but the term alien of just something that you don't understand, something unknown, it's foreign to you, it's alien to you. Like, we don't know how this creature works, we don't know what its defense mechanisms are, we don't know why it has acid blood, we don't know why it grows so fast, we don't know what it's trying to do. The omitted scene where it's like building cocoons and stuff like that. Why is it killing? Is it it's just defending itself, or is there something more to it? How intelligent is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? All of these questions that are just scary to think about, the idea of the unknown. But also just from like a filmmaking perspective, I love the slow burn of the opening act. I love just the kind of like haunting, it's like you're going into like a mysterious, foreign spaceship, that you have no idea what you're going to encounter, and everything is slow and methodical, and you're inspecting things and you're exploring things. But that is such a vast tonal shift from the end of the movie, where now like lights are flickering in your face, alarms are going off, steam is flying out of the vents, Ripley is running around the corridors with a flamethrower. Like, it just, the difference between the first half hour and the last half hour, and getting to that kind of transition from like this slow, methodical, long, lingering shots to this just like bombardment of intensity at the end. And it's part of the journey to get from that point A to point B that I love about this film so much. Xenomorph, one of the best, movie creatures, monsters of all time. Just incredible. And my number 1 favorite horror movie of the 1970s is Halloween. I think the beauty of Halloween is within its simplicity. It shows that you don't have to make a movie complicated to make it work. You don't have to add in a bunch of plot twists. You don't have to make it overly complicated. The thing that is so great about Halloween is that it takes such a simple premise. It's a guy that puts on a mask, carries a knife, he's stalking you, and he's going to kill you. It puts that setting within this sort of like suburban little town area, which kind of, adds to the horror because it's like it could happen to anybody. It could happen anywhere. Again, that fear of the unknown. I like not knowing why Michael Myers, went on his killing spree. Why is he just a little kid that picks up a knife and stabs his sister? Just because. He's just a kid, finds a knife, stabs his sister, has no regret, no remorse, waits around until he can do it again. There's something scary about that. We don't need the whole cult origins. We don't need the Rob Zombie, he came from an abusive family trope. Like, I like the idea that it could happen to anybody, anywhere, for any reason. Somebody could just decide to pick up a knife and kill you. And you are unprepared for it. You don't know when. A lot of this movie is also, the suspense, the atmosphere. There's pretty much no gore in this movie whatsoever. It's all about wondering when Michael Myers is going to strike. And this is what really exploded, slasher movies into the mainstream. This is the movie, even though others existed, Chainsaw, Black Christmas we talked about, but Halloween was kind of like the template that once this came out, everybody else followed this one. John Carpenter, one of the most legendary horror directors of all time, came up with the most basic, simple premise that he could for a horror movie. Not only spawning from that were countless sequels in the Halloween franchise, but also countless other franchises and other sequels that followed suit. I love Dr. Loomis, Donald Pleasence tracking him down, the stories that he tells about Michael Myers having the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes, just something like that. Again, super simple. All you're having is a character tell a story about his experience with the killer, but and the camera's just on Donald Pleasence, and you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to show it, physically. We don't need to go into a flashback. All you need to do is hear his story, and it just gives you the creeps, man. Every town has that one weird bad thing that happened in the past. Every town has that one abandoned house that, the kids make up stories about, with the Myers house. And the music, man. John Carpenter's score, it's just going to be forever engraved in my brain. When October starts, I remember just being a kid walking home from school every day, and every time I would feel that cold air and see those leaves on the ground, I would just hear the Halloween theme in my head no matter what. It's never going to leave my mind. And again, super simplistic, but if you take a simplistic setup but you execute it flawlessly, it can still be a masterpiece. And that's what Halloween is. Anyways, guys, there is my list of my personal top 10 favorite horror movies of the 70s. I also am going to be doing videos on the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, so look out for those through the rest of the month, as well as a couple of other horror themed videos that I want to give you guys too. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. Put your top 10 favorite horror films of the 1970s down below in the comments. I would love to hear your list. Other than that, guys, thanks for watching. As always, I hope you have a good beginning to your spooky season, and I'll see you throughout the month, guys. Take care.